Picture a mammoth standing beside you, 13 feet at the shoulder, 9 tons of muscle and fur, built to survive winters that would kill you in a single night. Its tusks alone are longer than you are, tall, curved, and sharp enough to lift a grown man off his feet without slowing down. Now picture what was actually hunting it. You. Soft-skinned. No claws, no fangs. Standing roughly chest-high to its knee, holding a sharpened stick. On paper, this isn't a fight. It's barely a joke. And yet the fossil record disagrees with you over and over again on every continent where Ice Age giants once lived. Mammoth ribs turn up with stone points still lodged inside them. Butchery marks appear on the bones of mastodons, giant bison, and animals so large that modern elephants look modest by comparison. These weren't animals that happened to already be dying. These were kills. Deliberate, repeated, and shockingly consistent across tens of thousands of years and thousands of miles. So here's the question worth sitting with for a second. How does a species with no natural weapons at all manage to reliably kill some of the most dangerous land animals in the planet's history? The oldest answer buried in the dirt comes from a lakeshore in what is now Schöningen, Germany. There, researchers found wooden spears dated to roughly 300,000 years old. Not sharpened branches grabbed in a panic. Carefully balanced shafts carved from spruce over 2 meters long, shaped with the kind of attention you'd expect from someone who understood exactly how weight and momentum work. They were found scattered among the remains of more than 50 horses, killed again and again at the same ambush point along the water's edge. Here's the detail that should genuinely surprise you. Whoever was hunting there, almost certainly an early relative of modern humans, wasn't just killing whatever wandered past. They were picking off family herds specifically, over loosely organized bachelor groups. That's not luck. That's strategy. That's an animal being studied, understood, and targeted with intention, 300 millennia before anything resembling written history existed. Think about what that actually means. Long before agriculture, before cities, before language, as we'd recognize it today, something using nothing but wood and patience had already figured out how to turn the deadliest animals on the continent into a reliable food source. Not through strength. Strength was never on the table. So if it wasn't muscle, what was it? The answer, waiting at the next site, completely rewrites the picture most people carry around in their heads. The one with a hunter hurling a spear javelin style at a charging beast. Because when scientists actually ran the numbers on that image, physics said no. And what they found instead was something closer to engineering than combat. For decades, the assumption around clawless points, those elegant stone spear tips found scattered near mammoth bones across North America, was simple. Hunters threw them. A group would surround the animal, launch spear after spear, and wait for blood loss to finish the job. It's the image every documentary defaults to. The problem is that human shoulders, no matter how strong or motivated, cannot generate the force needed to drive a stone tip through 9 tons of hide and muscle from a thrown distance. Researchers testing the physics in 2024 found the numbers simply didn't work. A thrown spear against an animal that size is closer to a thrown toothpick than a weapon. So the strategy had to be something else entirely. Something researchers now call pike hunting. Instead of throwing the spear, a hunter would brace it firmly against the ground, angle the stone tip upward, and let the animal do the dangerous work itself. When a charging mammoth collided with that planted spear, its own body weight and forward momentum drove the point deep into its own flesh, generating far more force than any human arm could produce alone. Researchers describe the resulting wound as functioning almost exactly like a modern hollow point bullet. A small entry point on the outside, catastrophic expansion, and splintering on the inside. This wasn't theoretical. In experimental tests, researchers dropped weights onto a planted, correctly angled spear tip from just over a foot up, and the wound pattern matched what shows up in the fossil record. To the mammoth at the moment of contact, it might have felt like a pinprick. What came a half second later, as its own charge kept driving the shaft deeper, would have been catastrophic. And there's a piece of direct physical proof that this wasn't just clever guesswork by modern scientists. In Washington state, archaeologists recovered a mastodon rib with a bone projectile point still embedded inside it, dated to roughly 13,800 years ago, older than the Clovis culture itself. That rib isn't a tool found nearby. It's the weapon caught in the act, fused into the very bone of the animal it was used against, sitting in the ground for well over 10,000 years as quiet proof that this strategy worked exactly the way the physics now says it should have. It's not raw strength winning here. It's redirected force. Humans figured out, through countless dangerous attempts and probably no small number of funerals, that you don't need to overpower a mammoth. You need to convince the mammoth to overpower itself and then get out of the way in time. But planting a spear only works if you can first get a multi-ton animal to charge directly into it at exactly the right angle at exactly the right moment. And that requires something else. Something that has nothing to do with weapons at all, and everything to do with people trusting each other enough to stand perfectly still while 9 tons of muscle bears down on them. Sometimes the terrain did the killing instead. Across multiple continents, hunter-gatherer groups independently arrived at the same brutal insight. You don't need a weapon at all if you have a cliff. Herds could be deliberately spooked and funneled by a coordinated group, working in tight concert, driven steadily toward a drop-off, and the animal's own panic would finish the job without a single spear ever being thrown. One of the clearest examples of this sits in Alberta, Canada, at a site called Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump. For nearly 6,000 years, generation after generation of hunters used the exact same cliff, the exact same drive lanes marked with stone cairns, to funnel entire herds of bison toward the same fatal edge. 6,000 years of the same knowledge, the same terrain, passed down and refined without ever needing to be written anywhere. That's not a lucky accident repeated by chance. That's inherited expertise, treated with the same seriousness a modern engineer might treat a bridge design. Then there's a strategy that might be the single most patient piece of ingenuity in this entire story: the trap pit. In 2019, researchers excavating a site near a planned airport uncovered hand-dug pits built specifically to trap woolly mammoths, dating back nearly 14,700 years. These weren't opportunistic dug once and abandoned. Evidence shows the very same pits were reused for more than 500 continuous years by generation after generation of the same community, each one inheriting the exact knowledge of where to dig and how to lure an animal into it. For a long time, researchers assumed ancient humans could only take down something the size of a mammoth if it was already sick, old, or wounded. This discovery quietly demolished that assumption. These pits were built to catch perfectly healthy animals, using nothing but carefully shaped holes in the ground and an intimate understanding of mammoth movement built up over literal centuries of watching. There's a small detail buried in that same discovery that's worth sitting with. When the hunters eventually abandoned the site, they didn't leave the remaining bones scattered carelessly. Researchers found tusks and shoulder blades arranged deliberately around skulls in patterns that look like ritual or gratitude or something close to both. Even in the middle of killing on what amounts to an industrial scale, spread across 5 centuries, there was apparently still room for something like reverence toward what had been taken. None of this, the cliffs, the pits, the planted spears, explains the full picture on its own, though. Because there's one more tool in the hunting kit that doesn't rely on tricking an animal into a trap at all. It relies on simply outlasting it. There's a hunting method that doesn't need a trap, a cliff, or even a weapon. It just needs you to keep moving longer than the animal can. It's called persistence hunting, and it leans on one of the only genuine physical advantages humans hold over almost every other large mammal on the planet. Most big animals cool themselves primarily by panting, a system that breaks down fast under sustained exertion. Humans, by contrast, can sweat continuously across nearly our entire body, which means we can keep running long after an animal built for short bursts of speed has to stop. The anatomy backs this up in ways that go beyond skin. Research on human skeletal structure has pointed to a cluster of features that show up specifically in our genus and nowhere else in the primate family tree. A ligament running along the back of the neck that stabilizes the head during running, an Achilles tendon that acts almost like a spring, storing and releasing energy with each stride, and leg proportions built for covering long distances efficiently rather than short bursts of speed. None of that is useful for climbing trees or throwing punches. It's useful for one thing, running something down until it physically can't run anymore. A hunting party tracking a single animal for hours, refusing to let it stop, rest, or recover, could eventually run it into total physical collapse. Any one hunter would lose badly in a sprint, but a sprint was never the plan. And none of these strategies, the planted pikes, the cliffs, the pits, the long chases, worked in isolation. They worked because people trusted each other enough to combine them. Someone driving the animal in exactly the right direction. Someone else holding a heavy pike at exactly the right angle, standing still while something capable of killing them instantly bore down in their direction. That kind of coordination, sustained across a hunting party's entire life, demands communication, trust, and shared planning. Sophisticated enough that many researchers now believe the sheer difficulty of killing megafauna helped shape human cognition itself. The animal that should have been nearly impossible to kill may be part of the reason we became smart enough and socially bonded enough to kill it reliably. It's worth being honest about the rest of this story too. We have no casualty records from the Ice Age, but it doesn't take much imagination to guess that pikes sometimes failed, drives sometimes went wrong, and pits sometimes favored the animal instead of the hunters. The risk was constant and real. The fact that people kept doing it anyway, generation after generation, tells you how essential that meat and fur genuinely were to surviving an Ice Age winter. And there's a darker thread running underneath the ingenuity. Many researchers now believe the eventual extinction of mammoths, mastodons, and most other Ice Age giants roughly 13,000 years ago came from some combination of rapid climate change and exactly this kind of increasingly efficient human hunting pressure. The same cleverness that let a small, clawless primate survive alongside genuinely terrifying animals may also be part of the reason none of them are still around for you to see today. So how did ancient humans actually hunt giants? Not through strength, because they never had any worth mentioning against something the size of a mammoth. They did it through redirected physics, planted spears turning an animal's own charge into its undoing. Through landscape turned into weapon, cliffs and pits doing lethal work while the hunters themselves stood safely at a distance. Through biology quietly exploited, an unfair talent for distance running paired with a cooling system, almost nothing else on land can match. And underneath every one of those, holding the whole thing together, coordination. People trusting each other enough to stand still in front of something that could kill them in a heartbeat. And doing it again. And again, for hundreds of thousands of years. A mammoth had no reason to fear one slow, clawless human standing at its knee. It just never saw the part where an entire group of them had already spent generations quietly figuring out how to make its own size the very thing that killed it.